faithfully conveying value while interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today we're interpreting the book titled The Other Nuremberg, the untold story of the Tokyo war crimes trials. In the mid-20th century, there were two major international tribunals: the Nuremberg trials that prosecuted Nazi German leaders, and the Tokyo trials that prosecuted Japanese militarists. From May 1946 to November 1948, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East tried 28 Japanese Class A war criminals. Ultimately, 25 were convicted of crimes against peace, murder, and crimes against humanity, except one exempted for insanity and two who died. 6, including Hideki Tojo, Iwane Matsui, and Kenji Doihara, received death sentences. Now, over 70 years later, the Tokyo trials remain frequently referenced.
Whenever Japanese officials visit Yasukuni Shrine, enshrining Class A war criminals, it draws international condemnation.
Especially in countries invaded by Japan like China, Korea, and the Philippines, public outrage runs high. They urge Japan's government to acknowledge the Tokyo trials' conclusions and sincerely reflect on historical crimes. Japanese right-wing elements vigorously discredit the trials to justify reviving militarism. Putting lipstick on a pig! History must not be falsified, and revealing truth is the best defense. The Other Nuremberg takes you to the Tokyo trial courtroom, exposing militarist crimes in full light. Notably, author Arnold C. Brackman was both researcher and eyewitness, covering most proceedings as a United Press international reporter. Brackman spent decades reviewing millions of archival words and interviewing judges, prosecutors, and defense lawyers, making this work uniquely valuable. Cheng Zhao-Chi, director of Shanghai Jiaotong University's Tokyo Trial Research Center, considers it the most meticulously researched volume on the subject. So I'll explore this book in 3 sections. Part 1, Preparatory Work, Legal Foundations, and Establishing the International Tribunal. Part 2, Strategies and Confrontations, the courtroom performances of prosecution and defense. Part 3, Verdict and Impact, the Tokyo trial's historical significance. All right, let's begin with Part 1, Preparatory Work, Legal Foundations for the Tokyo trials and Establishing the International Tribunal. In May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered, ending World War II in Europe. The Axis powers were down to just Japan, still resisting stubbornly. On July 26th, the 3 major Allied powers fighting Japan, China, the US, and Britain, issued the Potsdam Declaration, urging Japan to surrender unconditionally. In early August, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union joined the Potsdam Declaration signatories and declared war on Japan. Surrounded, the Japanese government announced acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration on August 14th, surrendering unconditionally to the Allies, ending World War II. Thus, it drew to a close. Article 10 of the Potsdam Declaration stipulated that Japanese war criminals guilty of atrocities like prisoner abuse and civilian massacres would face severe legal punishment by the Allies, forming the core legal basis for post-war trials. So, how exactly did the trial process unfold? I'll break it down into 3 steps. Step 1, compiling a list of war criminals and carrying out arrests. On August 30th, 1945, General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allied powers in the Far East, arrived in Japan. That same night, he ordered the Intelligence Division to draft a war criminal list. Based on the initial list, MacArthur issued arrest warrants on September 11th, apprehending 39 suspects including Hideki Tojo and Koki Hirota. Additional lists were still being prepared. Austin once announced the Allies would launch larger-scale arrests. At this point, an incident occurred. To cover up war crimes, Japan's interim cabinet handling post-war affairs surprisingly announced first that war criminals would be tried by Japanese courts. Upon hearing this, MacArthur flatly refused. He also warned the Japanese not to scheme, stating war criminals must be tried by the Allies. Arrests continued accordingly. From September to December, the Allies arrested thousands of war criminals. They were classified into three categories. Class A war criminals who planned aggressive wars and committed war crimes, numbering over 80. Class B war criminals who violated international conventions, like the Geneva Convention, by ordering massacres of prisoners and civilians, and those who carried out orders under command. Those who carried out these orders were Class C war criminals, totaling 854 individuals. Class B and Class C war criminals were immediately handed over to Allied military courts, with 51 sentenced to death. As for Class A war criminals, given the enormity of their crimes, the Allies took step 2, establishing an international tribunal for public trials. In January 1946, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, composed of representatives from 11 nations, was formally established. Which 11 countries? First were the 9 nations that signed Japan's surrender documents: China, the US, Britain, the Soviet Union, France, Canada, the Netherlands, Australia, and New Zealand. Plus 2 not yet independent nations, India and the Philippines. During World War II, India fought against Japanese aggression in Southeast Asia as a British Commonwealth member, while the US-controlled Philippines had secured American independence approval before the Pacific War, though Japan's invasion shattered its nation-building dreams. Early in the war, Filipino troops fought alongside Americans. After occupation, their relentless guerrilla resistance frustrated Japanese forces. This secured the Philippines a seat at the International Tribunal. Considering today's Southeast Asian nations like Burma, Malaysia, and Indonesia were then Western colonies, the Philippines essentially represented all Southeast Asia in judging Japanese aggressors. By February 1946, these 11 nations had each sent judges to Tokyo. Australian Judge William Webb, having investigated Japanese atrocities against Australian troops, was appointed Chief Justice for his deep understanding of Japan's war crimes. China sent jurist Mei Ruao, who held a Juris Doctor from the University of Chicago and was versed in common law. Since the tribunal operated under common law principles, Mei maintained effective communication with Webb and other judges, ensuring smooth proceedings once all judges were in place. The third step involved prosecution and defense preparations. First, the prosecution side. Similarly, 11 prosecutors formed the International Prosecution Section under the Allied Supreme Command. Chief Prosecutor Joseph Keenan headed the section as former U.S. Criminal Division Chief. He brought extensive criminal case experience. Under Keenan's leadership, prosecutors gathered evidence against Class A war criminals, quickly finding this the most challenging preparatory task. The 4-month gap between Japan's surrender and war criminal arrests allowed systematic evidence destruction. The author reveals, pre-post surrender, Japanese authorities ordered military and government offices to burn documents, resulting in all-night bonfires that consumed tons of archives. The entire contents of imperial conferences. All cabinet meeting records, most documents on Japan's planning of the China invasion and Pacific War, plus all prisoner of war records were targeted for destruction. Even worse, Japanese troops in many areas murdered POWs and laborers, then destroyed the bodies to erase evidence of abuse. Some hardliners even resorted to suicide to defy the impending trials. For example, former Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe, who bore major responsibility for starting the China and Pacific Wars, took poison just before his arrest. Others who killed themselves included Shigeru Honjo, Kwantung Army commander and architect of the 9/18 incident, Chikahiko Koizumi, Army Surgeon General and biowarfare planner, and Takijiro Onishi, Navy Vice Admiral, who created kamikaze units. Despite immense obstacles, prosecutors gathered substantial evidence. 3 primary sources. First, from war criminal interrogations. Second, diaries and letters of Japanese leaders and officers. Third, leads and physical evidence from survivors and anti-war activists across nations. Additionally, prosecutors created a cross-referencing system, compiling all evidence related to each war criminal into individual files for easy access. As cross-referencing improved, prosecutors narrowed Class A defendants from 80 plus to 28, 9 civilians and 19 military officers spanning positions like prime minister, foreign minister, and service chiefs. Now, its 2 defendants had unique status. First, Marquis Koichi Kido. Born into nobility, he served long as Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal, Emperor Hirohito's most trusted advisor who represented him in military political decisions. For complex reasons, Allied Commander MacArthur exempted the emperor from trial, making Kido a proxy defendant instead. Thus, Kido effectively stood trial in Hirohito's place. The other special figure was Shumei Okawa, founder of Japanese fascism, who incited ethnic hatred, advocated foreign wars, and provided militarism's ideological foundation. In the 1930s, young Japanese military officers repeatedly plotted coups, assassinating moderate officials. Okawa's radical ideology instigated these actions.
Prosecutors indicted him as a Class A criminal to uproot Japanese militarism at its ideological source.
To eradicate Japanese militarism completely. Under modern legal principles, even the worst criminals retained the right to defense. In May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered, ending World War II in Europe. The Axis powers were down to just Japan, still resisting stubbornly. On July 26th, the 3 major Allied powers fighting Japan, China, the US, and Britain, issued the Potsdam Declaration, urging Japan to surrender unconditionally. In early August, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union joined the Potsdam Declaration signatories and declared war on Japan. Surrounded, the Japanese government announced acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration on August 14th, surrendering unconditionally to the Allies, ending World War II. Thus, it drew to a close. Article 10 of the Potsdam Declaration stipulated that Japanese war criminals guilty of atrocities like prisoner abuse and civilian massacres would face severe legal punishment by the Allies, forming the core legal basis for post-war trials. So, how exactly did the trial process unfold? I'll break it down into 3 steps. Step 1. Compiling a list of war criminals and carrying out arrests. On August 30th, 1945, General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allied powers in the Far East, arrived in Japan. That same night, he ordered the Intelligence Division to draft a war criminal list. Based on the initial list, MacArthur issued arrest warrants on September 11th, apprehending 39 suspects including Hideki Tojo and Koki Hirota. Additional lists were still being prepared. Once announced, the Allies would launch larger-scale arrests. At this point, an incident occurred. To cover up war crimes, Japan's interim cabinet handling post-war affairs surprisingly announced first that war criminals would be tried by Japanese courts. Upon hearing this, MacArthur flatly refused. He also warned the Japanese not to scheme, stating war criminals must be tried by the Allies. Arrests continued accordingly. From September to December, the Allies arrested thousands of war criminals. They were classified into 3 categories. Class A war criminals who planned aggressive wars and committed war crimes, numbering over 80. Class B war criminals who violated international conventions like the Geneva Convention by ordering massacres of prisoners and civilians, and those who carried out orders under command. Those who carried out these orders were Class C war criminals, totaling 854 individuals. Class B and Class C war criminals were immediately handed over to Allied military courts, with 51 sentenced to death. As for Class A war criminals, given the enormity of their crimes, the Allies took step 2, establishing an international tribunal for public trials. In January 1946, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, composed of representatives from 11 nations, was formally established. Which 11 countries? First were the 9 nations that signed Japan's surrender documents: China, the US, Britain, the Soviet Union, France, Canada, the Netherlands, Australia, and New Zealand.
Plus 2 not yet independent nations, India and the Philippines.
During 281, India fought against Japanese aggression in Southeast Asia as a British Commonwealth member, while the U.S.-controlled Philippines had secured American independence approval before the Pacific War, though Japan's invasion shattered its nation-building dreams. Early in the war, Filipino troops fought alongside Americans. After occupation, their relentless guerrilla resistance frustrated Japanese forces. This secured the Philippines a seat at the International Tribunal. Considering today's Southeast Asian nations like Burma, Malaysia, and Indonesia were then Western colonies,
The Philippines essentially represented all Southeast Asia in judging Japanese aggressors.
Now, the murder charge, originally introduced by U.S. prosecutors for Pearl Harbor, meant Japan's undeclared attack killed over 2,400 Americans, constituting murder.
Prosecutors later broadened murder charges to essentially overlap with war crimes.
defendants violating war laws, like abusing POWs or killing civilians, could be charged with murder. But atrocities like the Nanjing massacre were too grave for mere murder charges. They fell under the third category, crimes against humanity. This charge originated from the earlier Nuremberg trials. When Nazi genocide against Jews was exposed, Western societies were horrified. Nuremberg prosecutors deemed standard charges inadequate for such atrocities, thus creating crimes against humanity. Allied forces relayed this to Tokyo, inspiring Keenan's team to extend the charge to all organized persecution with specific intent. With solid evidence, prosecutors showed the Nanjing massacre was systematic slaughter to break Chinese resistance. Thus, it wasn't just a war crime, it constituted crimes against humanity. Similarly, Japan's Bataan Death March, persecuting U.S. Filipino POWs, killing thousands, was deliberate anti-human atrocity. Keenan's three charges revealed prosecutors' core argument. Class A crimes were systematic state actions.
From planning wars to massacring civilians, these weren't isolated acts but premeditated state crimes.
Thus, Tokyo trials targeted not just individuals, but the entire militarist system. After prosecution's indictment, how did the defense respond? Answer: dodging substance. Defense lawyers set aside charges and challenged the court directly.
Kiyosei Ichiro immediately demanded Chief Justice Webb recuse himself, claiming bias from investigating Japanese atrocities in New Guinea, a common Western legal tactic.
Kiyosei Ichiro had studied in Europe and knew these tactics well. His move aimed to seize initiative and overwhelm the prosecution psychologically. Kiyosei Ichiro faced with the defense's challenge, the court announced a temporary recess. The 11 judges deliberated.
15 minutes later, judges returned and rejected the defense motion, stating SCAP appointed them and the defense had no authority to challenge appointments. Justice Webb affirmed he wouldn't wear tinted lenses but remain objective.
Seeing this, Ichiro challenged the entire tribunal's legitimacy.
He argued all 11 judges came from victorious nations, making it victor's justice.
Claiming it was unjust to the defeated, he demanded replacing judges with neutrals. Chief Prosecutor Keenan retorted, "Major nations were all involved."
Where would you find neutrals in World War II? Should we invite Martians as judges?
This drew roaring laughter, silencing the defense briefly. But they soon counterattacked. American lawyer Ben Blakeney stood. His Japan accepted Potsdam's War Criminal Punishment Clause. The crimes against peace and humanity didn't exist then. They're ex post facto laws. Non-retroactivity means these charges shouldn't apply.
Besides, no one in history was ever convicted for starting wars.
Prosecutors anticipated this. They'd monitored identical Nuremberg defenses. Keenan countered. Since the 1700s, international law condemned aggressive wars. Plunder and massacres violated modern war conventions. End quote. Soldiers must obey regardless of national legislation. Previous non-enforcement isn't justification. Keenan retorted, "If others run red lights unpunished, does that make my violation legal?" The court accepted prosecution arguments, rejecting all defense challenges. The trial entered phase 2, prosecution evidence presentation. As prosecutors presented hard-won evidence, previously composed Class A defendants grew visibly agitated. For instance, when shown Japanese military maps, propaganda brochures for Southeast Asia, even pre-printed occupation currency, all produced hurriedly in 1940. This proves Japan had long planned the Southeast Asia invasion. Crimes against peace were undeniable, with even Hideki Tojo showing unease. When prosecutors presented Nanjing massacre evidence, the war criminals' unease turned to terror. To substantiate Japanese atrocities, the court summoned numerous witnesses. Some were massacre survivors, others were foreign witnesses to the slaughter. Survivor Sheng Dai testified, Japanese soldiers bound him, his brother, and 5 neighbors, marched them to Yangtze River, and machine-gunned them among thousands. Sheng survived by being buried under corpses. Xu Tuanin, Red Cross member and Nanjing Safety Zone official, testified he saw Japanese troops shoot disarmed soldiers and civilians. Attempting body counts, he gave up at 500 corpses filled streets beyond reckoning. XU estimated the Red Cross buried over 43,000 bodies. Xu also accused Japanese soldiers of rampant rape, with countless women brutalized. This was corroborated by another witness, Minor Cyril Bates. Bates was then a history professor at Nanjing University. She stated, Japanese soldiers hunted women citywide like madmen. Victims ranged from 9-year-old girls to 76-year-old grandmothers. On December 15, 1937, alone, 30 female students were raped in one university building. As witnesses testified, the courtroom fell deathly silent. Everyone was stunned. The author observed war criminals turning pale, some terrified, clearly fearing their exposed crimes. Defense lawyers knew evidence was irrefutable, denying the massacre was impossible. Thus, the defense admitted the massacre, but desperately distanced defendants from responsibility. Field Commander Iwane Matsui bore ultimate responsibility. Foreign Minister Koki Hirota was charged for failing to halt atrocities. The defense claimed Matsui never ordered massacres and was unaware of subordinates' actions. As for Hirota, the defense argued he handled diplomacy and couldn't interfere in military affairs. However, prosecutors noted Nanjing University, where atrocities occurred, was right beside the Japanese embassy. During the massacre, the International Safety Committee submitted dozens of reports to the Japanese embassy and sent foreigners to protest daily. How could Foreign Minister Koki Hirota claim ignorance? As for Matsui not issuing massacre orders, that proves nothing. Butchers don't leave evidence for their own conviction. Nazis left no explicit orders for Jewish genocide either, yet the slaughter happened. Prosecutors revealed Matsui admitted during pre-trial questioning. Japanese diplomats told him troops were rampaging in Nanjing, drawing international condemnation. This proves both he and Hirota knew, yet did nothing. Why? Because Japan's cabinet and military tacitly approved using brutality to crush Chinese resistance. The same occurred across Southeast Asia. Filipino prosecutor Pedro Lopez charged that from 1942 to 1945, occupation forces executed systematic violence to eliminate guerrillas, terrorize civilians, and force submission. At least 130,000 POWs or civilians were killed, hundreds of thousands captured. Lopez declared bitterly, innocent people were beaten, thrown into cells, and tormented endlessly. Compared to Nazi gas chambers, that would have been quicker. Another charge. Japan conscripted POWs and laborers for railways, like 50,000 Allied POWs, British, American, and Australian, and 250,000 Asian laborers for the Burma-Thailand line. Work conditions were hellish. Daily deaths from exhaustion, starvation, or disease. Nearly 1/3 of POWs and over half the laborers died, earning it the name Death Railway. Japanese POW camps became human slaughterhouses, like Nazi concentration camps. Defense lawyers still excused defendants with ignorance or no direct orders. This time, prosecution's counterstrike was precise. Diaries and letters from Japanese officers documenting POW abuse, labor exploitation, and civilian killings. Prosecutors reminded defendants, Allied POWs constantly protested, and the U.S. repeatedly warned Japan to follow Geneva Convention. So, the defense's excuse of ignorance is a fatal blow that doesn't hold water. This comes from a report. This report was painstakingly compiled by the International Prosecution Section, conducting a comprehensive investigation into atrocities committed by Japanese forces in China, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and elsewhere. Oh, it was later compiled, spanning thousands of pages. Faced with overwhelming ironclad evidence, the defense lawyers lost their ability to counter. At this stage of the trial, the defense's arguments are basically a failure. The defense team had to adjust, shifting their strategy from ignorance to necessity. What does necessity mean? For instance, regarding the invasion of China, the defense claimed that due to high anti-Japanese sentiment harming Japan's interests there, they were forced to launch the war. I suppose.
Then why attack Pearl Harbor?
The answer is that the U.S. embargo on weapons and oil made it impossible to sustain the war abroad, forcing Japan to start the conflict. This logic is utterly absurd. Even Chief Justice Webb couldn't help but retort, "Are you saying that because America stopped Japan from waging aggressive wars, Japan was forced to launch an aggressive war against America?" Clearly, the court won't accept this rhetoric. The new defense strategy remains ineffective. The defense lawyers were backed into a corner. Their only hope was for the defendants to testify well and leave a good impression on the judges. Thus, the trial entered the third phase, defendants taking the stand, leading to a complete collapse of the defense. According to the rules, after the prosecution presents its case, defendants have the right to testify. By then, the trial had lasted over a year. Militarist, theorist Shumei Okawa was exempt due to mental illness. Diplomat Yosuke Matsuoka and former Navy Chief Osami Nagano had died. Thus, of the original 28 Class A war criminals, 25 remained. 15 took the stand, while 10, including Shunroku Hata and Kenji Doihara, waived the chance. It's generally believed they knew their sins were grave and thought it best to say little. In practice, not testifying was wise, because those who testified exposed their true nature, proving their aggressive tendencies to the world. The reasons for this are multifaceted. First, Class A war criminals were military and political leaders accustomed to arrogance, making it hard to humble themselves, especially army generals. For a long time, the Japanese army had a crude culture where officers spoke to each other like quarreling. Superiors were even more tyrannical towards subordinates, with insults and slaps being commonplace. Regarding laws of war and human life, the generals believed any cruelty was justified for victory. This mindset was bone deep and impossible to hide. So when defendants shouted in court, judges and journalists instantly felt accusing them of launching wars and persecuting innocents wasn't wrong. They absolutely did it. Prosecution's questioning reinforced this. For example, on October 7, 1947, Seishiro Itagaki took the stand. He was a chief architect of the 9/18 incident. After full-scale war erupted, he led the 5th Division as invasion spearhead. Chinese forces defeated his division at Tyrezlan. Post-Pearl Harbor, Itagaki conquered British Malaya and Dutch East Indies. His troops pillaged and slaughtered, committing countless atrocities. Yet in court, Itagaki showed zero remorse, denied responsibility, and claimed Japanese military discipline prevented prisoner abuse. Why 88? Then Chinese prosecutor Ni Zhengyu stood with documents showing Emperor Hirohito reprimanded Itagaki at an imperial conference for his troops' misconduct. Ni asked Itagaki, "Is this true?" Itagaki snarled, "Where did you get this? Tell me explicitly." As if commanding a subordinate, not addressing a prosecutor, Ni replied coldly, "You have no right to question me." Prosecutors then proved Itagaki's forces committed endless atrocities across China and Southeast Asia. And Itagaki not only knew, he encouraged them. His courtroom lies collapsed under irrefutable evidence, shattering his arrogance His spirit instantly broke. Afterward, Itagaki turned to Buddhist sutras seeking false peace.
Worse for the defense, defendants started blaming each other.
In militarist Japan, civilians and military feuded. Officials claimed wars were launched by military acting alone. Thus, responsibility lay with the military. Japan's foreign ministry even preserved evidence against them.
The military wasn't united either. The Navy blamed the Army for starting the China invasion.
The Army shot back. The Navy insisted on invading Southeast Asia for oil, leading to more scandals exposed. Defendants were digging their own graves, leaving defense lawyers exasperated. And, despite shifting blame, war criminals shared one consensus: never implicate the emperor. To exonerate him, they'd rather confess. When asked who bore responsibility for the Pacific War, Hideki Tojo initially evaded. But as prosecutors cornered him toward naming the emperor, he abruptly changed his answer. Since I was prime minister then, I'll take responsibility. In this context, defense arguments became meaningless. The defense line collapsed completely. After closing arguments, Chief Justice Webb adjourned court, announcing sentencing would follow. Trial. As we near the end, I'll explore Part 3, Verdict and Impact. The Tokyo Trial's historical significance. On November 12, 1948, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East convened for the last time. Red read the verdict firmly. All 25 defendants were convicted, 6 including Hideki Tojo, Koki Hirota, Kenji Doihara, Iwane Matsue, Seishiro Itagaki, Akira Muto, and Hitaro Kimura received death sentences for extreme atrocities.
16, including Kuniaki Koiso, Sadao Araki, and Koichi Kido, got life imprisonment.
Foreign ministers Shigenori Togo and Mamoru Shigemitsu received 20 and 7 years respectively. Reporters immediately rushed to phone booths. Next day, global headlines celebrated militarist ringleaders being severely punished. People everywhere cheered jubilantly. Late December 22nd, at Tokyo's Sugamo prison, Tojo and 5 others mounted the gallows. Nooses around their necks, trapdoors opened past midnight, their bodies plummeted as ropes snapped taut, instantly ending their sum of one sum. Their bodies were cremated, ashes scattered to prevent militarist veneration. Thus concluded the Tokyo trials.
The entire process lasted 2.5 years, producing 50,000 trial transcript pages plus 30,000 evidence documents.
The judge's verdict spanned 1,218 pages, 4.5 times longer than Nuremberg's. It can be said that the Tokyo trials, with irrefutable evidence, exposed Japanese militarism's war crimes and punished key war criminals. Of course, like any historical event, the Tokyo trials weren't perfect. The author identifies 3 main shortcomings. First, not putting the emperor on trial. Prosecutors initially planned to indict the emperor based on evidence, but SCAP Douglas MacArthur blocked it. Now, MacArthur saw the emperor as Japan's spiritual symbol. Trying him might cause social unrest and disrupt post-war reconstruction. Instead, Lord Keeper Koichi Kido was prosecuted as Hirohito's messenger to warn against political interference. Thus, the author contends Kido effectively stood trial for the emperor. The tribunal convicted Kido of crimes against peace, life sentence, indirectly judging the emperor, yet Hirohito's exemption had negative consequences. For example, exempting the head of state diluted Japan's national-level war responsibility. Other imperial family members were also spared prosecution to protect the emperor. Many royals instigated aggression, e.g. Prince Yasuhiko Asaka, Hirohito's uncle, commanded troops during the Nanjing massacre. Imperial immunity allowed his escape, leaving loopholes for militarist revival. The second shortcoming, not prosecuting biological warfare crimes. China had gathered evidence of Japanese biological warfare during the conflict. Chinese witnesses mentioned it at trial, yet judges, prosecutors, and defense all ignored it. Why? The author discovered late in why way Japan made progress developing nuclear weapons. Post-war, the U.S. struck a deal. Japan wouldn't share nuclear secrets with the USSR in exchange for immunity on biological warfare. Only decades later was Unit 73's human experimentation on Chinese or Koreans in bioweapons development exposed. The author quotes a Dutch judge at the Tokyo trials. The U.S. government should be ashamed for concealing such a horrific war crime until now. Now, the third shortcoming: excessively prolonged proceedings with objective causes. First, multiple languages used: Chinese, Japanese, English, French, Russian, required translation, consuming time, continuously emerging witnesses and evidence, also needed processing. Judges frequently adjourned court, sometimes for days. Later, defense used delaying tactics, obsessing over minor details during cross-examinations, repetitive questioning, even badgering witnesses, unchecked by judges. This created endless debates. While not acquitting defendants, it had clear downsides. The author notes, initially, global media covered trials extensively with daily headlines, but public interest waned due to length. Eventually, coverage retreated to newspaper margins. In contrast, Nuremberg's tight pace, under a year, kept it consistently front page.
The author suggests this partly explains Nuremberg's greater historical impact.
Still, despite flaws, the Tokyo trial's significance remains undeniable. In international law, from Hague Conventions to Kellogg-Briand Pact, aggressive wars are deemed unjust. But prior enforcement was absent. Nuremberg and Tokyo were humanity's first trials of nations for war crimes, turning international law from theory to practice. These trials established that specific war crimes must be borne by responsible organizations or individuals. Nuremberg prosecuted Nazi SS and Gestapo. Tokyo indicted Japan's entire wartime cabinet, setting precedent. Henceforth, no entity can excuse wartime crimes by claiming state action. The trials also awakened Japanese citizens to uphold peace. During proceedings, militarist atrocities were exposed one by one. Through media reports, the public learned. Many Japanese first discovered such atrocities committed by their military, feeling shock and shame. Japan's intellectuals deeply reflected, making critiques of militarism and war crimes mainstream. The new constitution, enacted in May 1947, embodied this reflection. Article 9 declares Japan forever renounces war as sovereign right, threatening or using force to settle international disputes. To achieve this, Japan maintains no land, sea, air forces, or war potential, renouncing belligerency, thus called the Peace Constitution, preserving Asian peace. Recently, far-right forces resurface, denying war crimes, advocating constitutional revision to revive militarism. Yet, as the author states, Tokyo's just verdict and millions of testimonies ensure militarists remain eternally condemned by history. This concludes our interpretation of the other Nuremberg, the untold story of the Tokyo war crimes trials. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.